You're listening to Grown and Growing with Sonia Hamlin. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Grown and Growing. I can't believe I'm about to wish you a happy fall, but happy fall. October is here. Summer is gone, and winter is quickly approaching. I cannot believe how fast time is moving. I just feel like the older I get, the quicker time is moving. And it's actually very relevant. Time moving fast is very relevant to the topic that my guest and I are going to discuss this week. We are talking about retirement. Yeah. Growing up, I really only knew about one version of retirement. It was drilled into my head that this is what you do to retire. You get a job, you work, you use your pension to travel around the world. And when you're done with that and you're super old, you move to Shady Pines with your girlfriends, right? That's how it works, right? Now I know that that is mostly a lie, or that wasn't the case for a lot of people that I know in my life. They didn't have that life in retirement. And the younger people growing up today, because of social media, because their information is so prevalent, they know that they have options when they retire. They know that they can travel now and travel later. They know that if they plan their life correctly, they can retire at 40 or at 50. They no longer need to work until they're 65. So there are definitely options out there for younger people who are thinking about retirement, if they even are at this point. And a lot of retirees that I knew, that I grew up with, grandparents, some people's parents, they work, they volunteer, they travel, they watch their grandkids. And unfortunately, a lot of people in this country actually struggle in retirement. And I want to say that that struggle is probably more prevalent than the nice, cushy retirement that I kind of just mentioned. And people are struggling financially. They're struggling with illnesses, with loneliness, and it's just not the life of a golden girl, unfortunately. A lot of our experience in retirement, I'm learning, is shaped by what we do before, right? Decades before. It's shaped years and years and years in the past. And that's crazy because it's not just, related to financials, right? You save your money, you invest your money, and then you have a bucket. And depending on how well you did in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, that sets you up for what kind of life you will live in your 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. But that's also the case with our relationships, right? It's the case with our health, right? What we did in the years before really dictate the strength of our relationships. Sometimes it dictates the quality of our health when we get older. So a lot of what we're doing now is sowing seeds for that we will harvest in the future, good and bad. My guest today is Dr. Jennifer Edwards. Dr. Edwards helps women protect and secure their finances. As a fourth-generation business owner and third-generation financial professional, she is an advocate for economic equity and safer saving strategies for marginalized women. As an expert in strategy and training, she is happy to meet with you either virtually or in person to review your financial plans with personalized care. Dr. Edwards has managed multi-million-dollar portfolios which serve communities throughout her career. She earned her PhD from Howard University, has an MBA as a working mom from Walden University, and a BS from Florida A&M. If you're ever in Dallas and you want to join her for a hike or a yoga session, feel free. She lives there with her husband and her 2 children. Without further ado, why don't we get into this topic? Good afternoon, Dr. Jennifer Edwards. How are you? Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm doing well. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. So glad that we were able to connect because we're going to discuss one of my favorite topics, or at least part of it is personal finance. I'm not an expert, but I really love talking about it and learning about it. Because there was a time in my life where I didn't know about it, and I spent a significant amount of time reading a lot of books. So this podcast is for, really centers the perspectives and the lifestyles and the viewpoints of women who are over 40. And I wanted to have you on today to talk about retirement, because I think we spend a lot of time thinking about getting older, and it is focused on how our body is changing and how we are going through menopause, or menopause is upon us, and the physical changes. But one thing that I don't hear a lot of people discussing is what happens during retirement. So you are an expert who help people, and women in particular, help them learn about financial freedom, mindful living, and leadership. So I wanted to have you on to talk about that. So tell us a little bit more about why you decided on this line of work and kind of what draws you to helping women get financial freedom.
Thanks for the question. And this conversation is so valuable and important. And so I just want to thank you for having the platform for so many ladies to learn. I have really been an entrepreneur now for about a decade. And I've always centered my work around serving women and serving moms. That's what I'm really passionate about
Mhm.
in various platforms for coaching and training
Mhm.
and things of that nature. So that just, it comes natural to me and I really enjoy it. I enjoy the financial wellness conversations. And I'm actually a fourth generation entrepreneur and third generation financial professional. Um, which I never could have called that, but growing up, I was playing with my grandmother's calculator back when they had the ticker tape where you would type the numbers and
Oh,
it would
wow.
print it
Yeah.
out.
Mhm.
I thought that was so much fun. And so so that's how I got started in the work. It's just really been around me for quite some time. And I want to see women like us grow and thrive, even though we might have challenging seasons. We can create a strategy to overcome that and to move forward.
Absolutely. It sounds like it's in your blood, which is which is nice. It's in your genes. If you were playing with a calculator, because I definitely wasn't. So I'm glad I'm glad that people like you in the world exist. So because we're talking about retirement, I just want to look at the aspect of retirement and how is it different when how do we as millennials or people in our generation, Gen X, right? Because Gen X is the next group demographic to retire. How has retirement changed, and how are people like me and you kind of looking at retirement? How is it different than what our parents or our grandparents experienced?
Right, right. That's a critical question because times have certainly changed. In the past, there was a strong reliance on things like pensions, for example, or even Social Security. And Social Security was never intended to cover our retirement. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. And so, what we have to think about now is how will I have enough finances to cover
Mhm.
the lifestyle that I still want to live and not have to adjust down against my will? Now, things like downsizing, or you might be an empty nester, that's totally different ballgame, and that's by choice. What we don't want is by force to have to
Right.
give up a lifestyle that we enjoy. And so there are definitely changes that we need to consider.
Mhm.
And it's important to sit down with a licensed professional like myself and say, what are my financial goals and targets so that you know what we're working towards. Sometimes it can be really in the clouds or esoteric,
Mhm.
working toward retirement, but it's really helpful to have a concrete number. And then you start working backward from there putting together the puzzle to make sure that you'll have enough when the time comes. And so
Mhm.
I like to speak with women about finances across the phases, because there are different things that you do if you're early career, if you're mid career, if you've got children, that's another time that you want to start looking at your finances, or if you're
Mhm.
approaching the empty nest years. So retirement is certainly looking different now. And then we even have this new dynamic of evolution, right?
Right.
Serena is still going to work. She might be working differently, and that's
Mhm.
okay too. And so we want to build that into our plan. Are we going to keep working differently?
Right.
What is the lifestyle we want to have? And will you also have your needs covered if something happens to you and your income at that time? So
Yeah.
lots of questions.
Lots of questions. And I think, the reason I asked that question is because in recent years, or maybe it's always been this way for particularly Black Americans, you find that the American dream, and when you think about like where we are with student loans, inflation, recessions, the wealth gap that we have in this country, it seems like the American dream is not attainable. It's not all what it's cracked up to be. And so I wonder if that's the same with retirement. Do people have this, like you said, esoteric viewpoint of what retirement is? And should we, change the way we think about retirement? And it seems like we should. So specifically, what should women in particular, whether you're married or not, what should we be prioritizing in retirement?
Yes, so that's a really helpful question, and I want to underscore what you just said, that the wealth gap is great. And when we plan in advance, we can, even if we're not where we want to be, we can have a positive money mindset to set our children up using things like life insurance, but also leveraging that as a tool while we're living, for example, to turn our situation around. And so
Mhm.
the first thing we need is the financial education, even listening to podcasts like this, to have an awareness of all of our options so that we can partner on a plan. You don't have to do it in
Right.
isolation, which we so commonly want to do, not only with finances, but in so many other things. And
Mhm.
a lot of times, as women and moms, it comes from a place of survival, but definitely get a plan and also partner with someone. And this probably isn't necessarily the financial aspect of the response that you want to hear, but we have to not be afraid or ashamed. I think
Mm.
that is the top thing that I see among potential clients, is that they're even ashamed to reach out because of the
Right.
financial situation that they're in. And they might have a totally different external image, but still have multiple six figures in debt, or don't know where to start when it comes to building for retirement. So the first step is to not be ashamed and to get the support that you need. And then that's when you start putting together the foundational pieces for retirement before you get to some of the more risky things like crypto and Bitcoin. I'm not the person to talk to about that.
Me either. But I'm glad you started
So,
with mindset, because I think that is the thing that holds people back from a lot of difficult things, difficult conversations, difficult moves in the workplace, difficult moves, difficult conversations at home, but really understanding that the first step is not like, oh, let me look at all the numbers, because that can be overwhelming. The first step is really to say, this is to acknowledge where you are and be okay with that and not be ashamed of that. And then, get your mind into a place where you decide that you want something different, for yourself as it relates to retirement. So if women are, if women are in their 40s, most of the women, not all, but most of the women who listen to this podcast are in their 40s or 50s. So if you have been consistently saving, right? If you have been working since you're 22, 23, been, you know, putting money into your 401k or putting money into retirement accounts, and you feel like you've reached this age and you feel like you're okay. How should this particular woman be thinking about retirement? What should she be doing in this phase of life?
Right, right. So my answer for someone in her 50s would be slightly different than for someone in her 40s.
Mm,
And of course, there would be individual considerations relating to what age the person might want to stop working. But what I can share right now, particularly if you're in your 40s, you have a little time. I just want to offer some comfort relating to the current market. If you do have, your 401k invested, first of all, make sure you've invested up to your employer's match. Don't walk away from their funds. Some people think it's a scam for some reason. It's not a
hmm.
scam. Let them match your funds, please.
Yes.
Um,
Get that free money.
right, right. And if you're in your 40s, I want to just offer reassurance to stay on the roller coaster that we're kind of on right now. I know it can be a little scary to see the amount decreasing. What you don't want to do is pull all your money out, because in the bigger picture, if everyone does that, it makes the market worse. But also, whenever you would go to put your money back in, you won't be able to buy as much with it. You won't be able to invest in as much with it. So if you're in your 40s, just ride it out. I know it's hard. Don't log in and check your accounts right now.
Yes.
I'll put it that way. And now, if you're in your 50s, if you have a little time, I would recommend the same, just to try to recover what you can. But then in general, under kind of less tense circumstances, I would say that's
Mhm.
when you certainly want to make sure that you have rolled your funds over into more stable types of accounts. So the
Okay.
safer strategies that I like to talk about, that I'm licensed to support, things like annuities, for example. If you work at universities, or if you work in a local setting, for example, cities and counties, your retirement funds are likely already in an annuity, and those are a little bit safer than 401ks, where you can choose riskier investments. But the closer that you get to retirement, the more you want to make sure that you don't have funds in riskier investments. You want to get
Hmm.
a little more stable. And then also, I would offer, if you're an empty nester, I've heard a lot of empty nesters right now who have sold their home to buy another home in cash, so it's fully paid off, because of the huge jump in the market,
That's
that we
nice.
were previously, right, that we were previously experiencing. I appreciate that approach. The gains aren't going to be as much now, but think about, is that a strategy that could work for you? Because something that I'm very passionate about is not having a mortgage and not paying rent in retirement. That's your largest expense, and you won't be working. So, however, you can free yourself from that, I certainly encourage it.
So, what is the typical retirement age? How does let's say the US government, I know it used to be 65. Is it still 65 or is it higher than that? What's the
Yeah.
general retirement age?
So it depends on who you ask. If you ask somebody who's 20 something now, they say, they're not working till they're in their 60s. They want to be a millionaire by the time they're 40 and be finished.
Smart people,
Uh,
smart people. I like those people.
right.
I
So
wish I
I
could go
just,
back.
I, I like to ground our perspective in that approach, in that thinking about finances really is changing across the generations. And we're all existing together, coexisting in workplaces together right now with all these different views. Um, but retirement age is really whatever you want it to be, as long as you have planned your funds appropriately to get there. At the same time, you want to pay attention to Social Security requirements if you intend to get your Social Security check. There are some thresholds at the age of 62, also at the age of 66, for example.
Mm,
And they kind of have a sliding scale relating to that, in terms of how much you would get at that time. And then similarly with your retirement plans at work, and this could vary by state, vary by employer, but you want to check in terms of when you would have access to getting paid
right.
from your retirement accounts. You don't want to have your retirement party and then realize you actually don't have access to your money.
You're
So,
going back to work.
right. Right. So
So
definitely check there.
So with women, so I kind of find myself in this camp. So I have been saving, but then I took a break. So what about women who are investing but feel like they're behind and need to play catch up? How should they
Mhm.
be looking at their retirements in their 40-year-old block and in their 50-year-old block? Do we have to sacrifice everything and start saving more to retirement? Like how much
Mhm.
sacrifice do we have to make or changes in our plans do we have to make in order to recoup some of that savings that we didn't have when we were not saving when we were younger?
Right. It affects more of us than I think we realize. And the important piece of it is today is the best time to start if you didn't start yesterday, and to not get too bogged down in feeling behind, because then that affects your days, that affects your health, your productivity. I do conversations and talks about financial wellness, and this is part of it in terms of how much it can affect other aspects of our life. And so I would first just say don't get down on yourself, but create a plan and work toward your plan. I like to offer the stretch goal of committing like a third of your funds to your savings and investments. That's more than you usually hear about. But if you're behind, I think that's important. And I do think it's attainable if you take the time to sit down and look at what you're spending and cut out the things that aren't necessary. I don't even think you have to totally bootstrap everything, cut everything, but maybe pass up the candle sale this year. I know it's fun,
Right.
but just start looking at things like that do add up over time. And then I also support clients with automating your savings so that it doesn't have to consume your mind 24/7. The
Mm-hmm.
idea is not to always think about money. We want to think about the lifestyle we have, how we can serve others, and how we can support our family. And so decide what you need to do with that plan and then automate it and go live your life. Go
Yeah.
enjoy.
That's good advice. I mean, because I do, while I think about retirement, I'm doing the best we can. I think that's good advice to not harp on it because it just makes you feel like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I guess that advice is similar for women who have not started at all, like who have
Mhm.
not started. Maybe they're in their 40s and they haven't prioritized savings for whatever reason that is personal to them. No judgment, but they haven't started. And so is there anything additional that somebody who hasn't started that you would tell them to do at this point?
Right. Start today. Start today. You definitely want to have your financial reserves in your own bank account so that you can access them quickly. You don't want to tie all of your funds up in things like your 401k or investments because it's harder to get to. I mean, if your car breaks down, for example. So if you really haven't saved anything, make sure you build up your financial reserves and then start focusing on things that are already offered at your employer, and then safer strategies like getting an independent annuity in place, an independent life insurance policy in place that's accumulating funds that you can also get to. You don't want to wait too long on the life insurance policy because your age and even your health, of course, will affect what you have to pay for that. But then you will have something in place that can help you schedule income for life later. And people a lot of times don't know that life policies can do that. So work on those foundational pieces, but definitely start today.
Yeah, I think a retirement or a emergency savings is super important because it's often those unforeseen financial things that come up that kind of throw you off of your game. And so a establishing an emergency fund up front can help, kind of level out those peaks and valleys when the unexpected happens. It doesn't have to throw you completely off of your game. So I think it's important to start there. Let me ask you a little bit about life insurance because you hear a lot about, I hear two things about life insurance. One, you get term life insurance and everybody needs term. And then I hear, how wealthy people use life insurance as savings, as investment vehicles, as vehicles to help them start a business or buy real estate. Can insurance do all of those things? And how do you decide which insurance vehicle is best for you?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. So the short answer is yes, insurance actually can do all of those things. And a lot of times we're left out of the narrative. We're left out of the dialogue and don't have that information. Um, I'm actually licensed in multiple states for life policies and then of course for annuities. I enjoy the safer strategies. Um, and I get to work with multiple financial companies and really choose what is best for that person. So sometimes if you hear someone like overly harping on term, for example, that might be all that they can offer. And
Mhm.
I do think it's important to have some kind of coverage. You can spend a little bit more where you get the kind of fancier policy that you're talking about that is growing your funds that you've put into it. And then you can absolutely schedule income from your policy. You can access funds from your policy for things like real estate. You can get a policy for your kids or your teens and then set up some income for them during their college years. And then you
Mhm.
still have the standard, estate benefit. If something, if you were to pass away, you get that payment as well. And then something that's super important for us and for your listeners would be thinking about chronic illness coverage, where you
Mm.
can access your funds while you're living, which a lot of people don't know. And that can make life
Right.
insurance conversations hard. Nobody wants to talk about what happens if they pass away. But it's important to know if you lose your income due to chronic illness, what do you have in place to support your family and to help with your family? And then, yes, you also want to think about your estate afterwards. So, life
Hmm.
insurance can do all of those things, and there are a range of options based on how much risk you want to take. There are some policies, and I've already made clear I'm not the risky person, but there are some
Mhm.
policies that mimic the stock market
Oh, wow.
in terms of the cash value available. It also means you can lose funds. And then there are other policies,
Mhm.
right? There are other policies that are more stable where your funds grow over time and you don't have to worry about those losses.
Okay. So a couple of things. One, I'm glad you brought up chronic illness because when you think about the country that we live in, and our healthcare infrastructure here in this country, the cost of healthcare in this country, it is crippling. I mean, I think most people go bankrupt because of healthcare expenses. And so as you get older, you naturally think that your body is going to wear down. You're going to have some illness at some point in your life, no matter what it is. And so it's interesting that you can get insurance to help cover you for that. When should you start looking at that kind of insurance? Like if you're getting like a long-term care insurance to help you when you're sick, if we're in our 40s now, let's just take that age, should we
Mhm.
start looking at that now, or should we wait until a little bit later to do that?
Right. So the earlier, the better. And I'm a health professional by day and
Mhm.
financial professional by night. I've managed multi-million dollar federal health budgets, and that's kind of even where some of my financial interests came into play as well. And what I can say with that, zooming out a bit, is that we're in a unique position where we're taking care of a lot of times our children. We are also taking care of our parents.
Mhm.
And we're at a point where things might start to go wrong. Or, I mean, things could even go wrong in terms of your health and pregnancy. We're having babies later that could lead to some serious chronic illnesses. And so, now would be the time you add that onto your coverage when you first get it, and then you don't have to worry about it
Hmm.
later, because when you need it, it's too late. You will not be
Right.
approved. they're not going to give it to you. I had my first life policy at the age of 23, and so the
Wow.
sooner the better. I still have it today. And the benefit is the earlier you get it, the less you're paying for all these benefits. As time moves on, you can still maybe get it, but they're going to either offer a lower policy amount, or they could deny you the policy, or you're going to be paying a lot more for the same benefits.
Okay. And so in that, you know, part of the conversation, you mentioned two things that I want to go back to that I want to make sure that people understand. One is term. So what is term life insurance? And then you mentioned annuities. What is that? So I
Mhm.
want to make sure that people kind of understand the different options. And those are just two, but what is
Yeah.
term life insurance?
So, term life insurance is what people typically think of when they think of life insurance. You
Mm,
pay it every month. If you pass away, then your family gets the funds. And it's for a certain number of years. And that's the policy. It's very straightforward. And then annuities are separate. They're not life policies. They are really really strong savings accounts that
mm,
accrue more interest than you would get if you just put it in a bank savings account. And that's where some of the public entities like universities or your city and county governments will place your money. They're in
right.
annuities. So it's like an IRA. It's an individual retirement account that is invested in more conservative places.
Okay. Thank you for that. What do
Hmm.
you think that people forget about? What do they forget about in retirement when they are thinking about how they want to live and everything? Are there common things that people neglect to think about when they're younger that they can plan for?
So there's kind of two extremes. There's the over aspirational who think they will have all the money they need, and so they don't need an annuity. They don't need stocks. Their new business is going to blow up and they'll have millions. So there's that end that I see, and then the other end is where there's a lack of acknowledgement for what could happen. So someone who doesn't want to acknowledge they might not be able to work as long as they think they're going to work. And so then there's not the planning in place. So there are two extremes of thinking, but they both lead to not setting up a plan for yourself.
Hmm.
So, really getting the concrete number in place for here's what you'll need in retirement. Here's about how long you'll be in retirement, or here's about how long you will live the work optional lifestyle. I love that because retirement for me might mean I'm still consulting, I'm still speaking, but it's on my terms, my schedule. But you've laid out what the numbers are and you have that plan. So I can't emphasize the plan enough, and that it should be based on a concrete number.
Hmm. And so, COVID and even before COVID, kind of ushered in a really like a gig economy where people are working for themselves. Social media gives people the opportunity to work for themselves and be entrepreneurs. You've been an entrepreneur for a very long time. How should entrepreneurs set themselves up for retirement? What can they do? Because they don't have the plan. They can't just go to their employer and say, okay, I'm ready to open up a 401k or whatever retirement account that they have at work. So what should they do
Right,
if you work for
right.
yourself?
And that's where these individual retirement accounts and annuities come into play, where for anyone, the overall puzzle should include individual accounts that are not attached to your employer. You don't want everything with your employer. What if you switch employers? It's a headache for sure, and you have to start transitioning things. You at least still want to have your own retirement account that is independent. And so for business owners, that's something that they should definitely seek out and set up, and then include in the budget. Not only are you paying yourself income from your business, but you should also be investing in what falls in the category of your benefits, where you're paying to your retirement. It has to be
Mhm.
part of your plan, just like your income.
Yeah. And so when you talk about individual retirement accounts separate from your employer, you're talking about Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, brokerage accounts, like a SEP IRA. A SEP is what you have when you have your own business, right? And you kind of play into that. Sometimes
So
I
it's Yeah, so it's up to you what
Hmm.
you focus on. The area that I specialize in are the annuities.
Hmm.
And then I'm also knowledgeable, of course, about your Roth IRAs or your traditional IRAs, which you can set those up independently as well. So it's about your preferences and your goals. You have to think as an entrepreneur, how much risk do you want to be part of your retirement
Right.
portfolio? And do you want that risk to be in a retirement account, or do you pursue something different like real estate or ETFs or Bitcoins and all these other things that are out
Hmm.
there? So it's an individual conversation, but the takeaway is to have an account somewhere where you're putting your funds.
Exactly. So
Mhm.
my husband, it kind of falls into this camp where he says he never wants to retire. He's an attorney and he's like, I'm gonna take cases until I'm 95. So for those kinds of people, which you mentioned before, who plan to always work, number one, how can they realistically put a plan in place for that type of lifestyle? Even if you don't plan to retire, you're still growing old. Things are still going to happen to you, health wise. Things are still happening in the world that may affect you financially. So, how do you prepare to continue to work, but still be able to take care of yourself or plan? I don't even know what you call it. It's not retirement. It's just
Right,
maybe it's a
right,
winding down, or like you said, Serena said, she's evolving into something else, or
right.
evolving down. Like, how do you plan for the person who says, well, it, maybe it's not that big a deal because I don't plan to retire.
Right. So I've got one of those at home too. I love him dearly, and I mean, he enjoys working and is very much traditional, like 9 to 5, and will work
Hmm.
for as long as he possibly can. I think in those conversations, it's really helpful to talk about it from a place of contingency planning. So your primary plan might not be retirement. At the same time, how do you want to protect your partner, protect your children? What finances do you want to have in place in case something happens? And that will usually resonate. And I'll even pause for a second here. Maybe we can save a couple of marriages together. And see, when it comes to finances, of course, it's a leading cause for separation and division, potentially divorce, for example. And I can't emphasize enough how much financial conversations are usually not about finances. So
Mm.
if you can find empathy and acceptance, just bring those two things to the table when it comes to financial conversations. That can help you at least move forward. So even if you're not on the same page, you can respect the other person and what's important to them, and maybe why it's important to them. What don't you know that has affected them maybe in their childhood or young adulthood that is leading to their financial decisions now? So I wanted to throw that out there. Maybe that can help somebody today too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you say it's really not about the money, and it involves so many more emotions that happen today as adults and that stem from our childhood and how our parents handle money, and how that affected you. So, yeah, I think that's a good tip to, bring some empathy to the conversation, because I think with money, because it's dollars and cents and it adds up and it's either there or it's not. I think people think it's a black and white conversation. It's like, be a saver, save more, stop spending. And
Right.
ultimately, like all things in life, it's not that simple, for
Right.
sure. So you mentioned, you brought up work optional living, which sounds amazing to me. Which sounds amazing. But how practical is that? Is it still achievable if you are in, the later half of your years and you haven't thought about it before? How do you define what work optional living is, and is it attainable for most people?
Right. So work optional living is really Can you choose to work or not? It means tomorrow, if you don't want to work, could you say, okay, I'll give my 2-week notice and I have planned in advance for this lifestyle. So work optional is really an alternative term for some who are a bit resistant to the word retirement.
Okay.
um, you know, where it just means at any point you're not relying on the income from your 9 to 5 work. And is it realistic? It's absolutely realistic. It does take time to work toward. Those who might have partners might think about maybe taking a baby step there. Can you live on one income and
Hmm.
see how that works? I think an important piece of work optional living is having moderation. Know the areas where you're bougie, know where you can't compromise, you're not willing to compromise. At the same time, that means everywhere else, you want to be airtight with your spending. Maybe you need an amazing purse. I'm a purse girl and a shoe girl. I'm
Hmm.
not giving that up. I could also kind of wear a t-shirt and jeans every day, so you want to think about how your spending is. Are you living beyond your means? And have a realistic conversation about yourself. Work optional living for you might not mean driving the luxury car. It might mean driving a more simple car. Most of the wealthy people are not out here putting on a whole show. I think that's
Hmm.
something a lot of us can kind of get caught up in sometimes,
Right.
is keeping up with the Joneses, and that's not
Hmm.
beneficial. So I think you have to have a realistic conversation with yourself about spending and how reasonable work optional living would be for you if you kind of, reined in the things you don't really need.
Yeah.
And then there are some who are in extraordinary roles with excellent income and wouldn't have to make any changes. So the work optional piece could come a little easier.
Yeah, and I like how that it also seems like it is not permanent. So maybe it's just that you don't enjoy the job that you're in currently. Or maybe, it presents challenges, whether it's about time or the work is hard or it's mentally challenging to go to that job. You can always say, okay, I'm leaving this job. There's a freedom in that,
Hmm.
where you don't have to stay where you're not wanted if you have enough money to save to leave. You know what I'm saying? So it may not even be
Yes.
just a long-term retirement option. It may just be that you want to get out of a situation that is not ideal for you. And how do you do that? I think people stay stuck in situations because they're living so close to the line that you need that paycheck. And
Hmm.
the thought of having to give it up is scary because it may cause financial turmoil in their life. So I like the idea of the freedom it gives you to make decisions within your that are best for your family, that's best for your mental health, and that's just or best for your pocket in any kind of way. So I think it goes with that mindfulness mindset that you're thinking. Just the to me, the thought of being able to be like, all right, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this toxic work environment. Let me get up out of here. Is appealing to me. So I guess when you see it that way, it does seem like it is attainable, but there are certain sacrifices you have to make, like you said, to get there. It is not like it's just going to automatically happen because you want it to.
Exactly, exactly. So sometimes the microaggressions can be tiring, and we all want a level of autonomy over our work and over our life, and we do lose that if we are overly dependent on our 9 to 5 income. And so as much as we can work toward having options at least, or being able to, like you said, it might not be permanent, but take a break. Maybe you can take off 6 months and look for something else that's meaningful for you and it won't hurt your pockets. That's financial wellness, and that's working toward the work optional lifestyle.
Mhm. And so what advice would you give to people who have a kind of a negative relationship with money? And so how do you change the mindset to make money not this fearful thing? but something that, how do they change their perspective about money where they want to be avoidant with it versus like engaging in it and using it to their benefit?
Exactly. That's a good question. The envelopes aren't going to kill you that come in the house if they are bills. Open them up. Don't leave them on your kitchen counter, please. And I understand that life. I've been in that position before where it gets really overwhelming at times. This is where the plan comes into place. When you have a plan for things, they feel less stressful, they feel less overwhelming. Money as money is not a bad thing. I think we even have some faith related blocks concerning money.
Mm.
There's a difference between wanting to support your needs and support your family's needs, and serve your community and give back. There's a difference between that and greed. There's a difference between that and loving money for money's sake. That's not what we're talking about here at all. And so, really doing a check about your views on money in that regard can be helpful and important. And then also just knowing that money is a tool, it's not bad. So
Mhm.
create your plan, work toward your plan. Think about why you might have the blocks that you have. Was money used as a tool of power over you by your parents? Did you not grow up with enough money? Did you grow up with abundant money and no education on what you're supposed to do with it? Start thinking about how you got to where you are in terms of how you view your money, and then kind of troubleshoot from there and come up with your plan.
Awesome. So, what kind of tools can you recommend? Are there books? Are there websites? Are there courses that you would recommend as a first step for someone who really wants to take a serious look at their retirement plan? Like, where do you like to see people go and utilize?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, I would love to do a consultation. I have to say that as a licensed professional, but the overall takeaway is to partner with a licensed professional. So someone that knows what they're doing when it comes to money. Um, Partner with a licensed counselor if you think your money needs are a little bit deeper and you really do need a mindset shift, for example. I do have a financial wellness course available that touches on federal data concerning finances and wealthy women in America and real estate and creating your financial plan and moving forward. And then more generally, have a budget. Um, and I know that can be basic, but a lot of us don't leverage a budget necessarily. So
Mhm.
have a reasonable budget, have a budget that I like set it and forget it budgets.
Mhm.
I'm not going
Me
to be
too.
the person, I'm not the person that's tracking my money in an envelope or anything like that. And automate as much as you can, which that's something easy to accomplish as well.
Yeah, I think automation makes it easy because then you don't miss it. I'm actually mentoring a recent graduate, undergraduate, and she was like, "Well, I'm setting up my 401k. Can I just do it later?" And I'm like, "No," because then
Right,
you're gonna get used to having that amount of money, and it's gonna be hard for you to let it go. And you'll adjust, but why even go through that adjustment period? Just do it from the beginning and you learn how to work with the money that you have and it's automatically doing it and you don't have to think about it. But it's hard to have something and then have to give it up for your future self, especially when she's 22. She's not thinking about being 62 really.
right.
Not
Right,
any real way.
right.
Um so, Dr. Jennifer, I'm going to call you Dr. Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining me. How can people reach you? I will have your information in the show notes, but why don't you tell us where we can find you on social or the webs, or how can we find you?
Sure. On Instagram, I'm at Dr. Jen Edwards, DRJENN Edwards. And if you want to have a conversation or just talk more about what you heard today, or check out my courses, you can go to jenniferjedwards.com.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate this conversation. I hope the listeners and my audience get a lot out of it because I certainly did. So thank you so much. And
Thank
for
you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for all that you're doing.
yeah, and for everybody else, I will see you next time.